Before a single snap is played in 2026, the San Francisco 49ers might already be facing one of the toughest competitive challenges in modern NFL history, and it has nothing to do with their roster, their quarterback, or their division rivals. It has everything to do with geography, altitude, jet lag, and recovery science. The NFL has officially confirmed that the 49ers will play regular season international games in both Mexico City and Australia during the 2026 season. And while that sounds exciting from a global brand perspective, from a football standpoint, this could quietly become one of the most punishing schedule disadvantages we've seen in years. We're not talking about a short flight to the East Coast. We're talking about a trip to Mexico City, which sits over 7,300 feet above sea level, and then an intercontinental journey to Australia that could involve 15-plus hours of flight time and a time zone shift so extreme it disrupts sleep cycles for an entire week. And here's the real question nobody is asking loudly enough. Does this fundamentally hurt the 49ers' competitive balance in a year where the margin between playoff seeding and elimination is razor-thin? Mexico City has already proven to be physically demanding for NFL teams. When the league hosted games at Estadio Azteca in the past, players openly discussed oxygen fatigue, quicker gassing in the second half, and increased muscle strain due to altitude adaptation issues. At 7,300-plus feet, oxygen levels drop significantly compared to Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara, which sits near sea level. Sports science is clear. Reduced oxygen availability affects aerobic endurance, slows recovery between plays, and can increase soft tissue injury risk when athletes push through fatigue. Even elite conditioning does not fully neutralize altitude effects unless teams acclimate for days in advance, and the NFL schedule rarely allows that luxury. Now layer on Australia. The logistical demands of flying from California to Australia are brutal. We're talking about crossing the international date line, flipping sleep schedules, dealing with circadian rhythm misalignment, dehydration from long-haul air travel, and then trying to perform at an NFL intensity level. Studies on professional athletes show that east to west or west to east travel across multiple time zones can impair reaction time, cognitive sharpness, and peak explosive output for several days. Football is a sport of milliseconds. A slightly delayed reaction from a defensive back can mean a touchdown allowed. A slightly slower pass rush step can mean a quarterback escape. These margins matter. Now imagine stacking 2 international trips in the same season. That is not a branding inconvenience. That is a physiological stress test. And this is where it gets interesting strategically. The 49ers under Kyle Shanahan have built a system predicated on rhythm, timing, and explosive yards after catch production. Offensive timing depends heavily on synchronization between quarterback and receivers. Defensive aggression depends on energy and rotational freshness. If recovery cycles are disrupted even slightly, it can affect the consistency that defines elite teams. The NFC West is rarely forgiving. One lost game due to fatigue can swing divisional seeding, and playoff positioning is everything. A number 1 seed means home field advantage and a bye. A number 5 seed means 3 straight elimination road games. Are we sure the league is giving San Francisco a neutral playing field here? Supporters will argue that the 49ers are uniquely positioned to handle travel because West Coast teams historically adapt better to long-haul Pacific travel than East Coast franchises. There's truth there. Travel to Australia from California is shorter and more aligned with Pacific time zones than it would be for teams from the East Coast. But let's not oversimplify this. Even optimized travel logistics don't eliminate circadian disruption. Teams can charter advanced sleep pods, adjust light exposure schedules, bring performance chefs, and still experience neurological fatigue. The NFL is not the NBA. These athletes collide at high velocity, 60-70 times per game. Reaction time, muscle elasticity, and mental processing speed directly influence injury risk. And injury risk compounds late in the season. If one of these international games falls in the back half of the schedule, the stress multiplier increases dramatically. Now think about roster construction implications. Do the 49ers lean deeper into rotation, heavy defensive line packages to compensate for fatigue? Do they adjust their sports science staffing? Do they lobby for a bye week immediately after the Australia game? The league sometimes provides scheduling relief after international appearances, but nothing guarantees ideal placement. And if the bye week positioning is unfavorable, the competitive ripple effect grows. Let's talk altitude in Mexico City specifically. When teams played there previously, many brought supplemental oxygen tanks to the sidelines. Conditioning staff reported increased heart rate variability, stress markers. At altitude, anaerobic bursts feel heavier. Recovery between drives shrinks. For a team like the 49ers, whose defensive front rotation thrives on relentless pressure, any compromise in oxygen efficiency reduces their ability to maintain four-quarter dominance. It's not hypothetical. Physiological data backs it. Hemoglobin saturation drops at altitude, and while elite athletes compensate better than average individuals, they are not immune. Now, connect this to injury probability. Research in sports medicine suggests that neuromuscular fatigue increases the likelihood of non-contact injuries, hamstring strains, calf pulls, ligament stress events. If a player's biomechanics degrades slightly because of fatigue or disrupted sleep, that can be the difference between a clean cut and a season-ending tear. The 49ers have battled injury narratives in recent seasons. Adding transcontinental travel stress could amplify that concern. Critics might say this is just part of the NFL's globalization strategy, and that every team eventually faces international travel. True. London games are common now. Mexico City is less frequent but manageable. Australia, however, introduces extreme distance and time zone shifts rarely seen in regular season NFL scheduling. This isn't a short London trip. This is a hemispheric relocation for a week. From a competitive fairness lens, it's reasonable to question whether the league balances these assignments proportionally across seasons. There's also the psychological dimension. Routine matters in professional sports. Players are creatures of habit, same sleep times, same practice rhythm, same pregame preparation cycles. International travel disrupts routine at a foundational level. Hotels, food sourcing, practice field conditions, even locker room setups differ. Some teams thrive on novelty. Others struggle with environmental variance. The 49ers leadership core veterans, captains, quarterback command, will determine whether this becomes a rallying narrative or a silent drain. And then there's the divisional race. The NFC West could be hyper-competitive in 2026. One extra loss due to fatigue, one poorly timed travel-induced slump could shift playoff trajectories. Strength of schedule compounds this issue. If international games are paired against elite opponents, the margin shrinks further. If they're against weaker teams, the risk of upset grows because fatigue equalizes talent gaps. From a business standpoint, the NFL sees this as growth. Expanding into Mexico strengthens North American fan engagement. Expanding into Australia taps a new market. The 49ers, as one of the league's global brands with a historic identity, are attractive ambassadors. But ambassador status comes with competitive cost. The question becomes whether the franchise leverages the global spotlight into a motivational edge or absorbs it as an unfair obstacle. Consider travel science mitigation strategies. Teams can fly earlier to acclimate. They can use controlled light exposure to reset circadian rhythms. They can implement hydration protocols and compression therapy during flights. They can simulate altitude training in advance. But none of this eliminates the reality that the body prefers stability. And the NFL calendar is already compressed. 17 regular season games, minimal practice padding, and high collision volume create little margin for systemic disruption. There's also strategic planning around depth. If Shanahan anticipates fatigue variables, we might see a greater emphasis on rotational depth in free agency in the draft leading up to 2026. More defensive line bodies. More versatile linebackers. Perhaps more reliance on the run game in international contests to control tempo and reduce snap volume. Tempo control could become a weapon shortening games, minimizing explosive defensive exposure, limiting altitude stress in Mexico City. Offensively, rhythm passing may become even more critical to counteract fatigue-driven drops in separation burst. And then there's fan perspective. International exposure strengthens the 49ers brand equity. Global merchandising spikes. International fan bases grow. Long-term, that increases revenue, which increases salary cap flexibility. There is an indirect competitive benefit financially. But that's macroeconomic. The micro-reality is that in 2026, the players' bodies absorb the costs first. So, is this a nightmare? Not necessarily. It's a challenge. Elite organizations turn logistical adversity into psychological edge. If the 49ers frame this as a statement season, conquer 2 continents, and the NFC, this becomes narrative fuel. If they complain publicly or stumble early, it becomes an excuse factory. The leadership tone matters. The coaching staff's preparation matters. And the schedule sequencing will ultimately determine how severe the impact is. If the Mexico City game is followed by a mini-bye and the Australia game precedes a full bye, the damage could be mitigated. If they're stacked without recovery, it becomes far more concerning. Ultimately, the 2026 season could become a case study in how globalization intersects with competitive equity. The 49ers are about to test the outer limits of travel science, altitude physiology, and recovery management in a way few NFL teams ever have. And in a league defined by inches and seconds, that matters. The real debate isn't whether international games are exciting, they are. It's whether the cumulative physical and neurological toll subtly shifts the competitive landscape. Because championships are rarely decided by talent alone. They're decided by availability, durability, and consistency. If the 49ers can maintain those 3 pillars across Mexico City's altitude and Australia's time warp, they won't just survive 2026, they'll prove they can win anywhere on Earth. But if the schedule stress fractures their rhythm even slightly, the cost could show up when it matters most: January football. And that's the part nobody should ignore.